Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Face Turn with Candace Cordelia. I am your host, Candace Cordelia, and today I am 100% honored to introduce to you the one and only Chris Van Vliet. Now, you might be aware of Chris's work as a host of Insight with Chris Van Vliet on YouTube. Also, just all of the amazing interviews that he's done with wrestlers and other entertainment personalities. But today we are going to talk about Chris, his background, how he got into wrestling and entertainment. And I also want to ask you about bass fishing, Chris. We have a lot of things to get into. But first and foremost, thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm doing great, Candace. Thank you so much. Super grateful to be here. And yeah, excited to dive into all this with you.
Likewise. So you know what? We're going to take it all the way back to your childhood because, I think that Americans, not all, but some just have this romantic notion of what it's like to be Canadian and to grow up in Canada. So yes, talk to us about your childhood, what it was like growing up in Canada.
What I think's so funny is how many Americans have never been to Canada. And like, if you live upstate New York or Michigan or North Dakota or something, you're 50 miles or 100 miles from Canada. And I think that people just think that we drink beer and play hockey up there, which is accurate. That is true. We do that. But yeah, I grew up about half an hour outside of Toronto in a town called Pickering, Ontario. So a suburb of Toronto. And I was just absolutely in love with broadcasting from a young age. And that was something that I wanted to do. And also realistically thought to myself, that kind of seems like a long shot. But my story with broadcasting, my journey with broadcasting began when I was 4 years old. I had a Fisher-Price tape recorder with cassette tapes and would pretend to be the radio host that I heard on the radio. And I would pretend to have these little radio broadcasts. And as I got a little bit older, I thought, man, that seems like such a long shot. There's not that many people that are on TV or not that many people that are on the radio. And I'm sure we'll get into it here, but I just kind of thought to myself, why not me? What am I waiting for? Why not try? And if it doesn't work out, at least I could say that I tried. But growing up in Canada was amazing. And I still think it's the greatest country on earth. And Toronto's the greatest city on earth. And most of my family is still there and most of my friends are there and I love it and I miss it. I'm going back for Christmas and can't wait to see my family. I will say I don't necessarily miss the Canadian winters that much. And yes, it's cold. It is cold and I don't miss the winters, but I'm much happier here when it's, 70 degrees in December rather than minus 17 degrees or something back home.
Certainly. And I love Canada. I have family there and every time that I go there, it's been a few years, pre-pandemic, but I feel at home. I mean, I've only been to Toronto. I have yet to go to Vancouver, that's on my bucket list. I've heard.
Oh, you need to. I lived there for a year. Vancouver's amazing.
Yeah. I've heard. And it seems like they film everything there.
Yeah, it's like Hollywood North.
Yes, exactly. But I just find it really cool that, you're from Canada and you've managed to carve this really amazing career here in the States. How did wrestling come into everything in the forefront as a kid? Was that something that you watched growing up or did it not happen until a bit later in your youth?
It was something I was certainly aware of when I was younger. I remember in the early 90s, it would just be on at my grandparents' house. Not that they were huge wrestling fans by any means, but they like to have sports on the TVs. So if it wasn't hockey or baseball or football or basketball, maybe it was the Saturday night main event. And I became aware of like the larger than life characters at that time, which was Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Repo Man, Big Boss Man, Coco Beware. And I was just kind of aware of it. And then fast forward to the late 90s, I was on my high school wrestling team just because I loved the idea of wrestling. So I was on the high school amateur wrestling team. And one of my very best friends was a huge pro wrestling fan. And in the 90s, we did this crazy thing when you had a best friend called talking on the phone. Wild, I know, right? And I knew that every Monday night at 9 o'clock, our phone call would abruptly come to an end because Raw was coming on TV. And he was such a huge fan. And there was one day when our conversation wasn't quite done. And I said, all right, man, I'll stay on the phone with you like for the next 10, 15 minutes so we can finish out what we were talking about. And I'll put on TSN, which is the sports channel in Canada. I'll put this on and I'll watch Raw with you. And I got sucked into it. And I'm such a passionate person that when I like something, I dive all the way in. I don't check the depth of the water or the temperature of the water. I just dive all the way in. I'll figure it out when I get in there. I'll doggy paddle my way around. And it was McMahon and Austin was the big storyline of the time. And I was just really drawn into these larger than life characters that were taking their personalities and just turning it up to 11. And I went from watching 0 minutes of wrestling to watching everything, Raw and Nitro and ECW and Jacked and Metal and Heat and some of the pay-per-views. And I just started loving it. And I very quickly started a backyard wrestling company with some of my other friends, a backyard wrestling federation. And I went from not even being a wrestling fan to wanting to be a wrestler. And I was a really big part of my high school years, like 16, 17, and 18. I would say you could define me as just like the guy who loved both wrestling, and you mentioned it off the top of the show, bass fishing. Like I would like, in fact, there was one guy at my high school who nicknamed me Fishing Wrestling because that was all I talked about, fishing and wrestling all the time.
Wow. So hold on, because this backyard wrestling federation, I'm trying to envision this. How exactly did this work? Was it after school? You guys just got together and said, yeah, let's have a match. Let's just book you with this person, see who wins, and that's that?
That was exactly it. Yeah. And this was the time when backyard wrestling was a really big thing. This is 2000, 2001. Backyard wrestling, especially on the internet, and the internet was relatively in its infancy at that time. Backyard wrestling was a really big thing. And people will remember that WWE or WWF at the time was having the don't try this at home things before every single episode of Raw, because so many of us were trying this at home and thought we knew what we were doing. And we certainly did not know what we were doing at all. But there was 10 or 12 of us. We had a backyard wrestling federation called the HCW, Hardcore Canadian Wrestling. I was Chris Sharp, and he's sharp talking, sharp walking, sharp dressing. And I had a big rivalry with Danny Courageous and Rage. And it was exactly what you described. It was 10 or 12 of us, and we'd go, all right, you've got a match with him. Here's your kind of like storyline, cut a promo before this. And we videotaped it. And that was another rare thing. Not everybody walked around with these, smartphones, cameras in their pocket. So my friend Greg's parents had a camera, and we would film this. We put it up on our website. And this it became so much of a thing that people would come and watch us do this. We had a crowd one time of like 70 people in my friend's backyard. Wow.
So is this footage still out there? Because you've opened up the Kraken pretty much. So,
yes. So years ago, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I put like a highlight reel on Instagram and on Facebook. So I think that if you typed in like Chris Van Vliet, Chris Sharp, or Chris Van Vliet HCW, you'll see something, and you'll see me doing a bunch of swanton bombs off a table onto gym mats.
Wow, that's amazing. I have to look for this now, because that is really, really cool. And what I love is that you're coming from a background where you actually did try to do wrestling, not just backyard, but I did read that you were training to be a wrestler at one point, and it took just a bad bump for you to say, I don't know if this is for me. Do you mind expanding more on that experience and really just what was going through your mind when you were saying to yourself, I'm going to train to be a wrestler. I'm actually going to go out and do this and see how far I'm going to take it.
So I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been playing pretty much every sport that's been put in front of me. I played baseball and hockey. I was on the basketball team and the volleyball team in elementary school, track and field, cross country, and the wrestling team in high school. So I loved being athletic. And I think that really lent itself to the backyard wrestling that I was doing. And again, so passionate about this that I was like, all right, when I have the money and I have a car, I'm going to go to wrestling school. And there were a lot of great wrestling schools in the Toronto area. So when I was 20, I started training at the Squared Circle, and it was the summer between I guess it'd be my second and third year of college. And I was training there in the summer, and it was about a half-hour drive from my hometown. And I was training there at the time, like Angelina Love was there at the time, and Tracy Brooks was there at the time. They'd already trained, but they were like kind of like freshening up in the ring there and like honing their skills. So I was training there and I was picking it up, I thought like relatively fast, like running the ropes and lockups and scoop slams and all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed it. Then when it was time that September to go back to school, it was now an hour drive away, and wrestling school is 4 days a week. At least that one was. It was Tuesday, Thursday, and all day Saturday, Sunday. And it's about $250. And that's a lot of money when you're in college. So I kind of had to make a decision. I was at a fork in the road, and I had to decide to myself, which way do I go here? Do I go down the path of school, get my communication studies degree, follow that broadcasting dream that I've always had? Or do I go this way and go to wrestling school and follow that dream of becoming a pro wrestler? Because I didn't want to try to do both. I wanted to put myself all the way into whichever one that it was that I chose. I chose broadcasting and the communication studies degree. And I thought wrestling will always be there. If I want to train to be a pro wrestler when I'm 22, when I graduate, or 25 or 32, whatever, it'll always be there. I don't want to give up on school, and I want to give that the best try, best effort that I can. So that was really it. I trained for a few months. I'm still fortunate now that I can be in broadcasting and dip my toe into the wrestling world as a ring announcer, or maybe taking a bump here or there. But I think that everything happens for a reason. And I'm on the path that I'm on now for a reason. And I'm glad that I tried it. I'm glad that I went in there and actually trained. And I know what it feels like to take a bump. Doesn't tickle. I know what it feels like just to run the ropes, and woof, that'll knock the wind out of you. And I've said this before, but I think it's really interesting that we can watch a basketball game, and whether you played pro basketball or not, or you played organized basketball or not, you've probably dribbled a ball before. You've probably shot at a hoop before. And whether or not you've played football before, you've probably thrown a football around, even if it's just at a tailgate or something. It's so interesting to me that so many people watch wrestling and have never even stepped into a squared circle. They don't even know, like, what does the mat feel like? Is it bouncy? Is it hard? It is very hard, by the way. And I think that's interesting. And I'm glad that even though I'm not doing that as a career, I can go, oh yeah, I know what that feels like now.
You raise a really excellent point. And I want to ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think that a majority of people who watch wrestling have never stepped in a ring before to test it out?
It's not like you can just go down to the local playground like you can with a basketball hoop or a baseball diamond. You can't just go down to the local playground and climb through the ropes and get in. You could try it at a local indie show, or try it at a WWE or AEW or Impact show. Probably going to get kicked out, possibly arrested. I don't know. So I think there's a lot of people that just love watching it, and maybe they don't actually want to go in there and do it. And that's okay. I'm just really glad that I know what it feels like now. And I know that that could have been something that I would have tried, but really glad with how everything worked out now.
Yes. So let's go right into your career. Just to preface, before wrestling, or rather in tandem, you have had and still have a successful career doing entertainment broadcasting. And I mean, you've been all over, such as in Ohio and Miami. You've been able to talk with celebrities that a lot of people would just, kill to talk for, or talk to rather. And now you're doing wrestling. So talk to us about how that transition felt like for you, where it was going from, say, WSBN, where you were on Deco Drive in Miami, you're talking to a bunch of celebrities on a weekly basis and everyone knows who you are, to getting to AEW, for example, and really testing the waters and saying to yourself, I'm going to do this and see how this pans out as an interviewer for a major wrestling promotion.
My entire career, I've been so fortunate to be able to interview some of the biggest stars on the planet. It's been so cool. So like talking to people like Denzel Washington or Tom Cruise or The Rock or Oprah or whomever, like it's been so amazing. And being a big wrestling fan, when you're talking to people in the entertainment space, whether they're an actor, a director, a comedian, whatever, every once in a while, we'd have the chance to talk to a wrestler, whether WWE was in town or someone from WWE was promoting a movie. I was like, so this is how it started out. I was hosting a show for MTV2 in Vancouver. And we're going back to like 2006 here. And I knew that in January of 2007, SmackDown with ECW was coming to town. So I asked my boss, I said, do you think if I reached out to WWE? And they said, yes. Could we do an interview with a wrestler? And she's like, yeah, of course. Yeah, we've done that before. And I went, oh my gosh. I'm going to get paid to talk to a wrestler. I can't believe this. And this is also a time really before YouTube was a thing, really before people were putting a lot of Facebook videos out there. I'm like, I'm not only going to talk to a wrestler and get a great TV segment, but I'm also going to have the chance to ask them all the questions that I've always wanted to ask just as a fan. That's where this began. And fast forward a bunch of years, it went from like one wrestling interview a year to 2 or 3 to when I was living in Cleveland. I was like, oh, this independent wrestling federation is bringing in Christopher Daniels, for example, or Buff Bagwell, for example. What if I reached out to my friend who works for that independent wrestling company and asked them, hey, could I do this interview for my YouTube channel? And, we both promote each other. There's a real value there. And they were like, yeah, of course, because nobody was really doing this at the time. So that was kind of how it started growing. And while I was interviewing all of these Hollywood celebrities, I was every once in a while doing an interview with a wrestler, and those were blowing up on my YouTube channel. And I never had any intention to start a YouTube channel to become a YouTuber or to make anything of this. I was just thinking, in the world of television, if you're not watching Channel 19 at exactly 4:17 p.m. on this exact Thursday, you'll never see this interview. So I thought, I'll just take this raw interview that so many people might want to see. Let's put this on my YouTube channel, and it's there if you want to see it, kind of like a digital library, like a digital archive of these interviews. And some of them just started getting picked up. And that's when I went, oh, other wrestling fans are just as passionate as I am. Maybe I'll try to go out of my way to do even more of these.
That's really, I mean, it's, to someone that wants to be where you are, especially now in 2021, that might sound a bit daunting because now it seems like we have more competition, not just on YouTube, but in wrestling media in general. I would love to know your thoughts about that, specifically just how much is coming out now more than ever. I mean, we're going into 2022 and there could be even more in terms of YouTubers trying to do exactly what you're doing, to folks trying to get into the space of doing backstage interviews and journalism. What are your thoughts?
I always say that the best thing about podcasting is anyone can do it. And the worst thing about podcasting is anyone can do it. And I think it's really important that if you're trying to get into the space, not just in podcasting, but YouTube or any sort of content creation, I think you need to go into it with 2 things in mind. Ask yourself, number one, why are you doing it? What's the reason behind it? Are you doing it just so you can hang out with wrestlers and say you had a chance to talk to so-and-so? If you want to, that's okay. Seems a little self-serving, but maybe that's, one way to look at it. Or maybe you're asking yourself, why do I want to do this? Well, maybe it's to like earn an income, or maybe it's to get another job. That's another thing. I think it's important to know why you're doing it. And then it's important to figure out, how are you going to be different from everybody else who's doing this or wants to do this? And I think that that's a real determining factor there, because this is now becoming like a needle in a haystack type of thing. And I think that you need to figure out, what are you going to do to make yourself that needle in the haystack? Why is someone going to look for your interviews or your content over everybody else's? And then I know I said there were only 2 things, but I'll add a third one in here. It's really important to be consistent. You can't just do one thing every few weeks and expect people to find you. I think it's important to go every Tuesday and Thursday, or every Monday and Wednesday, whatever it happens to be. I'm going to put stuff out there and just be consistent with it and stick with it.
Fabulous advice. I would take that personally, and I will, because it's not in a bad way. That's I'm listening to that now, and I believe you're absolutely right, especially going into this new year. All of the changes that I definitely want to talk to you about within wrestling in general. I mean, we have Ring of Honor, the big change that happened recently in terms of they're going into a hiatus. We have what's going on with MLW. There's little cuts happening here and there. And then we have All Elite Wrestling, Impact, WWE. There's so much happening, and it's happening within a time that it's still very much, no one knows what's going to even take place within next week. We're still kind of slowly getting out of this pandemic, and anything could pretty much happen. So I want to go into All Elite Wrestling, because you recently did make a statement about, your time that you spent there when they were just getting themselves off of the ground and really finding their sea legs and all of that amazing stuff. Let us know. I mean, you did talk about your beginning and how it was and how the experience was as well. But one question I want to ask is, when you were there and you were doing these interviews, was there any person that you, as soon as you saw them or talked to them, that you immediately thought this person is going to be a star and there's someone to definitely watch, whether it's in All Elite or even just within wrestling in general?
What I think AEW has done a really good job at is making new stars. And early on, I had really fortunate to be able to have some of the first interviews with someone like Darby Allin, with someone like Jack Perry, Jungle Boy. I had a very interesting conversation with MJF, who, love him or hate him, he's very entertaining and he's very good at what he does. He's not a very nice man, but he's very good at what he does. And I think that those are three people that when you meet them, it's one thing, but when you see them on camera, you go, oh, that's a star. And those are three names that, like, right off the top of my head, are people that we're going to be talking about 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So I think that those are some big talent. I think that they're going to have the chance to get the ball and run with it. Maybe not, immediately, but in the next year or two, I think that they're going to have a chance to really show what they can do.
I agree with you. I can't say that I disagree. I definitely do also see that. As well, just going into other promotions as well, like Ring of Honor, MLW, Impact, WWE. What are your thoughts about what's happening within the landscape of wrestling and their roles in it and what they've been doing within this pandemic itself?
It's been a really exciting time to be a pro wrestling fan because there's so many options right now. And I think that in that, because it's such an exciting time to be a wrestling fan, it's also a great time to be a wrestler as well. If we take this back 15 years ago, it was WWE, or that was really it. I mean, Impact or TNA was starting to come up at that time. I guess maybe let's take it back 20 years ago. Impact was starting to become a thing, or TNA was starting to become a thing. Now you've got all kinds of options. And pre-pandemic, we were also seeing a lot of people who could be insanely successful, not even signing with a company, just on the indies, like selling tons of merch. It's changed a lot. And I think that rising tides lift all ships. And I think that what AEW is doing is rising it up. WWE is rising it up. And it's really helping everybody else. New Japan and Impact and MLW and because there's so many great companies out there. And I just think it's really exciting. I just think that too many fans are getting caught up in like the what's next. And I think it's really important to be present. This is just life advice too. Like, be present in this moment, but also be present in what's happening in wrestling. And I think there's so many pro wrestling fans that unfortunately like to focus on all the negative things. And I think that there's always going to be positives. There's always going to be negatives. And I think it's important to go, hey, I liked this, and this about the show, instead of leading with, this sucks, I hated this, what are they doing with this character? I think that there's a lot of amazing stuff going on in every company right now and all the different organizations. And I would just like to focus on the stuff that's going on that I like, because look, it's subjective. Entertainment is subjective as a whole. And I'm not just talking about wrestling. Entertainment's subjective. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean other people don't like it.
You might be hitting a nerve right there when this comes out.
People don't like to hear this. People also don't like to hear that it is possible. I know this is crazy, everyone. It is possible to like more than one company. I know it's wild. It's crazy to think about it, but it is okay to like Raw on Monday and also like Dynamite on Wednesday. I know it's wild, everyone. This is a crazy thought, but yes, it's okay to like both. You don't have to like one or the other. This is not a dichotomy.
And I think that's what is so baffling to others when you put it in that context, because you just said that, there's so many options. There's so much to watch, more now than quite honestly ever before when it comes to wrestling. And a lot of people have been clamoring for that. They've been asking for more wrestling. And now that we have it, there's this other war where it's like, oh, we have all of this wrestling, but you can only like this or you can only like that. It's very interesting. We live in really intriguing times when it comes to this.
Yeah, like if you said, Candace, my favorite ice cream flavor is Rocky Road, and I said, well, how could you possibly like Rocky Road? Mint chocolate chip is the best. Like, it wouldn't make any sense. I would just go, oh, cool, that's pretty good flavor. I don't like it all the time, but pretty good flavor. I like mint chocolate chip. Agree to disagree. That's the way it should be.
Exactly. Well, I have to say I don't like either flavor.
How dare you?
I can't say either. I'm a cookies and cream, coffee, rum raisin. Those are my jams. That's just me, though. That's just me. But if you didn't like any of those,
how could anyone like rum raisin? Let's just, I mean, when you go back in, I don't know where I was going with that.
I recently got that, though. I told a friend that I liked rum raisin, and he was like, where did that come from? How do you do raisin with rum? And I'm like, it tastes great to me. That's just my preference. But there it is. It's the preference, right? It's what people like and what people don't like. And we should be able to, yeah.
And that's not to say that someone's opinion is right or wrong. Definitely not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there's not enough respect for someone liking something or disliking something. I think that people look at it in this black or white thing, like you're either with me or you're against me. And I think it can be like, no. We all fall under the umbrella of being pro wrestling fans / sports entertainment fans, whatever you want to call it. We all fall under that umbrella. Like if you see someone walking with, in real life, by the way, not on the internet, if you see someone wearing like an NWO shirt and you're, mostly an AEW fan, are you telling me you're not going to go out of your way to like too sweet that person or to say like nice shirt or something like that? Of course you are. It's like that scene in Step Brothers where it's like, did we just become best friends? Yep.
One of my favorite movies. Oh, now
such a good movie.
It really is. It really is. As we're talking about this, I do want to bring up another quote that you stated recently, which I think also hit a nerve, but I'll just get into it. When you stated about an active wrestler, if an active wrestler needs or wants to or has the inclination to carve a career in Hollywood, that some things are going to have to change, which makes sense. If you're, in my opinion, if you are going out to say, I want to make movies in Hollywood, and you are a wrestler in whichever promotion you're a wrestler in, you're going to have to make some adjustments to that. Do you mind expanding also on that as well? Because I think when that quote came out, perhaps there were people that didn't quite understand what you meant by that. But if you don't mind getting into that and from your opinion, what you meant when you said that, because
I'm guessing people didn't see the full interview and just saw that quote, because the question was, who do you think is the next breakout star in Hollywood from WWE? And I said, I think in order to be a breakout star in Hollywood, you have to go all in on Hollywood. And the three biggest examples of that are The Rock, John Cena, and Dave Bautista. They left wrestling behind because they went all the way in on Hollywood and started from square one in Hollywood with a clean slate. So I said, if it's going to be Becky or Roman or anybody else, great. And if they want to go all the way in on Hollywood, they have to go, all right, here's what I accomplished in the world of wrestling. It was awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you for everything. Now I'm going to start this other thing, because I don't think that, I love this quote. It's, the man who chases two rabbits catches none. And I think that if you go halfway in on wrestling and halfway in on Hollywood, you'll only really be halfway successful at both of them. So the question was, who's going to be the next breakout star? And I said, whoever it is needs to leave wrestling behind and go all the way in if they truly want to be as successful as they could be in Hollywood.
Out of those that you've stated, Becky Lynch, Roman Reigns, I'm going to add in Sasha Banks because she's been doing a lot. And also I'll add in Alexa Bliss or anyone else who could be on this or in this conversation.
Yeah, anybody really.
Yeah, exactly. Who do you see breaking out within, say, the next 3 years and going Hollywood?
I don't know. Like, I think that all those people that we just listed are a really big part of the WWE landscape right now. And I think that if any of them left WWE, there'd be a really big hole to fill. So I wouldn't wish for any of them to leave WWE. But if they had the inclination or they had the passion, because I think that that's the most important thing, I think that they should go for it. I think that anyone has the ability to do it. Anyone could get some, especially with the money that they have and the resources that they have, they could get the best acting coaches. They probably already have great agents. It's just a matter of, do they want it? And are they willing to work as hard in that next career? Because it is another career. Are they willing to work as hard in that other career as they've worked in their pro wrestling career?
All really fantastic points, and we'll see. You never know within the.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of wrestling fans that think it's like a lateral move, like, oh, they were really successful in wrestling, then they will be really successful also in acting. And I don't think that's the way it is. I think it's, you were really successful in wrestling, now you want to go over to acting? Okay, great. Back to square one, like back to starting out, and like, are you good at doing this? Do you have the chops?
Yeah. And it's hard. It's going, as we both know, especially for you, entertainment is a whole other bag versus wrestling. And if you're able to be successful in both realms, I mean, that's kudos to you, because they're both equally hard industries to gain a foothold in.
Yeah. And like you look at, I recently interviewed John Cena and I said, can you believe it's been 15 years since the Marine? And he's like, Mike, you're right. 15 years. So here we are 15 years later, starting to talk about John Cena as a leading man, starting to talk about John Cena's name being the first one on the marquee. 15 years. That's crazy. And like, same with The Rock. Like Rock, don't get me wrong, Rock had a ton of success in the 2000s, but it wasn't till really Fast and Furious 5, then Pain and Gain, when Rock started becoming the Rock that we know and love now. And that was 10 plus years into his acting career.
Right. And speaking of The Rock, are there any questions that you wished you would have asked him, or if given the chance to interview him again, that you would love to ask him now?
I wish I had more time. Like every interview I've done with The Rock's been like 5-ish minutes or less. I guess I had one interview, it was like 8 minutes. I just wish I could have more time with him. And it'd be really interesting to hear his whole story, because Rock's been both successful and unsuccessful in a lot of different things in his life. And The Rock's had some identity shifts throughout his career, because before we all knew him as The Rock and Rocky Maivia, before we all knew him as a wrestler, he wanted to be an NFL player. And he got cut from the CFL. So his identity was football player. And it's crazy to think that The Rock didn't make it. And The Rock like is so driven, right? Like The Rock sets a goal and goes and crushes the goal. So his goal was NFL star, didn't even make it in the CFL, had to figure things out, goes into wrestling, brand new identity there, goes to the very top in wrestling, then decides he wants to go into Hollywood, starts back at basically zero, and becomes a star in Hollywood. Then identity shift again into being an action star in Hollywood. So I would love to talk to him about that journey from Rock, first of all, from Dwayne Johnson, the football player, to Rocky Maivia, to The Rock, to Dwayne The Rock Johnson, to now Dwayne Johnson.
And we would love to see it, because it's just, you're right. The journey that he's had, when you look back at that, and even if you're just watching his television show and you're just getting to know him through that television show, there's so much that has occurred in his life where it's like the fact that you are where you are right now is just a testament to your hard work, being at the right place at the right time, and a dash of luck. Is just fantastic and amazing to see that and to witness it.
Yeah, and he has a lot. He's been pulled in a lot of different directions. Anyone who's at the level that he's at has been pulled in a lot of different directions. I'd also love to talk to him about what his decision-making process looks like. You know, he has 24 hours in a day, just like we do. He just seems to be accomplishing a lot more. So it'd be so interesting to hear how he delegates things, how he decides to say yes or no to something. I would just love to hear that. I wonder if is Rock having hour-long Zoom calls, or is Rock able to make a 10-minute call with everything he needs in it?
Right? Oh, we have to get the scoop.
I would love, and I would love to do this while bass fishing on Rock's private pond.
Yes, the transition, because I was thinking, okay, we got to talk about this bass fishing, because first of all, the fact that bass fishing is competitive, is a competitive sport, that's so fascinating. But also the fact that you are a competitive bass fisher. How did this get started for you? Where did this love of bass fishing come from?
It was when I was 4 years old. Also, I guess 4 years old was a really formative time for me with broadcasting and bass fishing. Also, the first year I played t-ball, my goodness. Wow. I'm just putting that all together now. We went to our neighbor's cottage, and they had a cottage just north of Toronto, and all the other kids were a little bit older. So I didn't really have anyone to play with. My parents stuck me out on the end of a dock with a life jacket on and a rod with a worm and a bobber. And I caught my first fish, and pun intended, I was hooked. And every single time we went up to their cottage, all I wanted to do was fish. Like from the second we parked the car, I would run out to the dock and immediately start fishing. And it was just something that I was so drawn to. So when I got a little bit older, fished in my first bass tournament when I was 14, and that became a really big part of who I was. You know, you want to talk about identity. That was a huge part of my identity, was that I loved fishing, not just bass fishing. Like there, my high school backed onto a creek, and in the fall, the salmon would run up the creek to spawn. I had a fishing rod in my locker so that I could go down during lunchtime, catch a salmon or two, take a photo or two, and then run back up and finish my classes that day.
Oh my goodness. I can't imagine being from Philly. It's like, what, how does this, but I love that.
The Delaware River has lots of fish.
It does, but I never had any classmates that had a fishing rod.
There is a very famous professional bass fisherman named Mike Iaconelli that's from your area.
Very familiar with the name. Absolutely.
Really?
Yes. I'm the type where it's like you give me a name and I'm like, yes, I've heard of that. If I haven't, then I'm going to go research and check it out.
Yeah, Mike Iaconelli.
Yes, absolutely. But getting into the sport of fishing, what does that look like? Because a lot of people before this interview, I'm sure there are some people that didn't even know that bass fishing was something you could be a competitor in. So what does that take?
Yeah, there's tournaments all across the US and all across Canada. And it's basically trying to find your 5 biggest bass in the day. So, if you and I were competing against each other, you'd go out in your boat, I would go out in my boat, and hundreds of other people, about maybe 100, 150 people in the tournament. And you're bringing back your 5 biggest bass, all alive, by the way. These fish are all alive and they get released back into the water after the tournament. But breaking it down without going too deep into the weeds with this, but it's basically, I didn't even mean that. There's weeds in fishing or grass in fishing. I didn't even mean to do that. It's basically, what are the seasonal patterns of these fish? In the springtime, bass are doing a lot different things than they are in the heat of the summer, or in the fall when they're feeding up to, hibernate in the winter or just not be as active in the winter. So it's figuring, this is so nerdy. It's figuring out like the seasonal patterns, like in the spring, they may be up a little bit shallower. Maybe they're feeding more on like a shad or a minnow. In the summer, perhaps they're eating more crayfish, and maybe in the deeper water. It's all of this different stuff, figuring out like, where are they this time of year? Where are they this week even? And trying to put it all together. And I know that people think that fishing's a lot of luck, but when you look at the big fishing tournaments, BASS or FLW, it's always the same names at the top of that list.
And you stated nerdy, and I'm like, we're already in it. We all have our things. So, this is a safe space to talk about wrestling and bass fishing.
And I love bass fishing so much that my fishing partner and I started a bass fishing company, which ironically, I didn't even know we were going to talk about it. I wore my Woo tungsten shirt here. We sell tungsten fishing weights for bass fishing.
Oh my goodness. So you're an entrepreneur. You're really deep into this, which is really
cool. Yeah. We have an e-commerce brand, which is both direct to consumer and B2B. We've had it now. It turns 5 this week, actually. So it's been a really exciting adventure, and also brought me a lot closer to my business partner, who's my best friend, Aaron. And look, what's great is when you're able to take something you're passionate about, do it every single day. And then I think the cherry on top is doing it with people that you love.
Mm-hmm. So getting into things you love and going back to wrestling, what do you hope to do with your career in the new year? Is there anything that you already have on your list of goals that you want to tackle as soon as January 2022 hits?
I think that because the wrestling interviews have gotten so many views on YouTube, that I think a lot of people think I just interview wrestlers. And I think it's important to make people understand that, no, I just interview people that I think are interesting, or people that are successful, whether they're actors or comedians, directors, entrepreneurs, thought leaders. I did a fascinating interview recently with a former FBI negotiator, just about like how you can negotiate anything. I had a great interview. I loved this interview with an astrophysicist, breaking down like just wild stuff, like any question you'd want to ask an astrophysicist about time travel or aliens or wormholes. So I want to just be able to continue gaining insight. And that's why my show is called Insight. My podcast is called Insight. I want to be able to take their insight and hopefully apply it to my own life. And then everybody else can apply it to their life as well. And yes, don't worry. I will always interview wrestlers. I find them fascinating. But I think because of the success that the wrestling interviews have had, I think that people haven't also realized that I interview lots of other people from all kinds of different walks of life. So the goals in 2021 are to just continue to expand that. My podcast studio or podcast network has a brand new studio in Las Vegas inside the Wynn Hotel. And it's like a gorgeous, beautiful studio. So I'm looking forward to doing more in-person interviews there. And also looking into just like trying to grow that. Like I want to make content that I find interesting. And hopefully through that, other people also find it interesting.
And the numbers don't lie. A lot of people are finding what you have to say, but also what your guests have to say extremely interesting. And they're learning more about them, not just based on their professions, but being a human being.
Sure.
They're getting to know other people that they may have never thought they would get to know just through your channel. So you're doing a great and wonderful service.
Well, I think that so often, especially with social media, we just see the finished product. We just see the end result. We just see Tom Brady with 7 Super Bowl rings, or we just see Oprah with, all of the success that she's had. And we don't see the path along the way. We don't see the struggles along the way. We don't see that someone was, delivering newspapers or working at the local fast food restaurant. We don't see that. And I think it's important to realize that everybody has a journey. And I think that the more that we hear the struggles that other people have, the struggles that very successful people have had along their way, it humanizes them more. And it makes you realize that if you're only step 3 into a 47-step journey, that it's okay to be only on step 3, but be reaching for step 4 and step 5 and figuring things out along the way.
Very profound. I mean, you're just a wealth of knowledge, Chris, and it's so wonderful talking to you. And it's been really amazing seeing your career trajectory, whether whoever is listening or watching, if you know Chris from just his Insight podcast. But before we had this interview, I was saying that I remember you from your entertainment interviews from Deco Drive and the famous interview you had, I believe it was with Leslie Mann and Dakota Johnson.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I think that was actually the first interview that I saw of yours on YouTube, to be quite honest. And then I saw the follow-up with Dakota. So it's been really awesome seeing your journey, and we can't wait to see more of it. So thank you for being a part of this show. My last question, and you gave our listeners some great advice, especially for those surely who want to get in this space, who want to do what you do or anything resembling it. Is there any advice that you've received that you really take to heart, that you just always remember, even when you're having a tough day or you're thinking, okay, this is a really difficult time I'm going through, and it just brings you back to your core and your center?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Candace, thank you so much for having me on. You do such a great job, and it's an honor to be able to share this time with you. So thank you. And in terms of advice, I always go back to something that John Cena said, and it was so profound. And I think about it almost every day. And it's so simple, but it's so powerful. He said, control the controllable. And I think that so often in our life, we get upset about things that we have no control over. And what we do have control over is how we want to react to the things that are happening around us. We can't control the things that are happening around us, but we can control how we react to the things that are happening around us. And in the interview that I did with John Cena, he just kept coming back to that same point. Control the controllable. Take what you have in front of you and make it the best that you can. Don't be thinking about other things that you are out of your reach and you don't have any control over. So control the controllable is a big one that I always come back to.
And now I will come back to that, and hopefully those watching and listening will also, because that is important advice. And I 100% agree. Thank you once again, Chris. Thank you for your kind words, your knowledge, your wisdom, and just being you. And I can't wait to see what else comes of your career. And hopefully everyone watching feels the same way. So thank you. Love having you on this show. Hope to do it again in the future in person. That would be amazing.
Let's do it. This has been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Candace.
You're so welcome, Chris. And thank you all for watching another episode of Face Turn with Candace Cordelia, where we have exclusive interviews with folks within the wrestling industry that you love to see, hear, and watch. I will be back with another fantastic interview in the very near future. So stay tuned and take care.